IVM.
Hi, I'm Satyajit.
Hi, I'm Racheta.
Welcome to Paperback by the Open Library Project.
We have as our guest today Saee Khandekar. Saee is the author of Crumbs and soon to be released Pangat, a book on Marathi recipes, both of which we discuss in the first half of the episode.
In the second half, we discuss Jerusalem by Yotam Ottolenghi and Sami Tamimi, The Missing Ingredient by Jenny Linford, and Memories with Food at Gypsy House by Felicity and Roald. Happy listening.
Many children these days do not even know that there's a connection between milk and ghee. Why, my own brother was once stunned to witness a cow being milked in a sleepy little village in the interiors of Maharashtra when he was just about 7 years old. City bred, he had only seen milk arrive at the doorstep in plastic packets and was turned off by the offer of a cup of fresh, frothy milk, unpasteurized and without packaging, still warm from the cow's body temperature. There is an almost forgotten rhyme which starts and ends in praise of God, but is really about the life cycle of milk, and it goes something like this. Datta datta dattachi gaya, गाईचे दूध दुधाची साय, साईचे दही दह्याचे लोणी, लोण्याचे तूप तुपाची बेरी, बेरीची माती मातीचा गणपती, गणपतीची घंटा वाजे घण घण घण. At the risk of sounding like someone from my grandmother's generation, I believe that a vast majority of recent eating disorders can be attributed to the loss of this culinary literature. We now no longer know about seasonal produce, what it does, how food grows, or the fact that root to tip or nose to tail eating has been the basis of our culinary heritage for hundreds of years. As a result, we eat what food companies throw at us. Sugary packaged cereal and vegetables such as kale and broccoli instead of the local amaranth in both its grain and leaf forms. If only all of us had heard this little rhyme.
Thank you, Saee Khandekar. That was an extract from her book, Pangat, A Feast. We'll be right back after this to discuss the book in further detail.
Did you know that Parsis in Mumbai, instead of being left at the Tower of Silence after they die, are now cremated? And why? Because a cow fell sick in the early 1990s. Did you know that the smog in Delhi is caused by something that farmers in Punjab do and that there's no way to stop them? Did you know that there wasn't one gas tragedy in Bhopal but 3? One of them was seen but 2 were unseen. Did you know that many well-intentioned government policies hurt the people they're supposed to help? Why was demonetization a bad idea? How should GST have been implemented? Why are all our politicians so corrupt when not all of them are bad people? I'm Amit Verma, and in my weekly podcast, The Seen and the Unseen, I take a shot at answering all these questions and many more. I aim to go beyond the seen and show you the unseen effects of public policy and private action. I speak to experts on economics, political philosophy, cognitive neuroscience, and constitutional law so that the insights can blow not only my mind, but also yours. The Seen and the Unseen releases every Monday. So do check out the archives and follow the show at seenunseen.in. You can also subscribe to The Seen and the Unseen on whatever podcast app you happen to prefer.
Welcome to Paperback by the Open Library Project. I am your co-host Satyajit, otherwise known as Onion Knight in most food circles. I'm hosting this podcast with my co-founder at the Open Library Project, Racheta Sharma.
Hi guys, my name is Racheta. I'm an ex-banker, social impact entrepreneur, podcaster, writer, publisher, and inveterate learner. The Open Library Project is a curated library service which is offered to corporates on a subscription basis. The idea here is to create value, build a knowledge community, and encourage a growth mindset amongst our members.
Today we have with us on the show Saee Khandekar, author and food consultant. Welcome to the show, Saee.
Thank you.
It's great
lovely,
to have you.
yeah.
And that was a lovely nursery rhyme that you read out.
Thank you.
We would love for you to explain it as well.
Yeah, so it's basically talking about the cycle of milk, you know, how you first buy the milk or get the milk and then you let it sit for a while and then there's cream that, you know, collects on the top.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then the cream becomes butter at some point. And then when you cook the butter down and clarify it, it becomes ghee. Mm-hmm. And once you remove the ghee, there is the berry that, the milk solids that are caramelized at the bottom.
Right.
Yeah.
And that gets added to the mitti, और उस मिट्टी का गणपति बनता है.
Right.
So, you're just coming full circle. It's talking about the various stages in which milk gets used in the house. And I thought it was important to write about it because I feel children or even adults in, cities like Bombay don't know how ghee happens or, how butter happens, and the fact that it's all linked to one basic product, which is milk.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's very important that we identify that, food appears in our literature and literature appears in our food, and there is this very organic relationship between the two.
Right.
And it's quite an interesting one too, just having a link of food to religion or to history or to, various cultures. It's quite fascinating.
It just puts it in a different context, I feel, different perspective when you see it through these different lenses.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then when you've seen it through like a couple of different lenses, a lot of different things start to make sense.
Yeah. It makes you appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. So, Saee, tell us a little bit about how did you get into food? And you're a food consultant and not a chef, you mentioned.
I'm not a chef. I'm very particular about that.
Right. So tell us a little bit about your journey and how it led you to writing books.
So it's a little, long-winded. But so I didn't set out to work in food. I studied literature. I did my master's in English literature. And like any good English literature student, I went on and became an editor. And then I did a little bit of instructional design and all of that.
Right.
But somewhere before all of this happened, I did a 2-year sort of certificate course in bakery and confectionery.
Okay.
And because I enjoyed bakery and confectionery, and at the time it gave me the option of dropping 2 subjects, which was absolutely fascinating. Because as an art student, my other options were political science, which I did not want to do at all.
Right.
History, which had the most terrible teacher.
Right.
And Hindi, which I wasn't so kicked about at that time. Now I regret. But those were my options. And so I could drop them and take bakery and confectionery. So I was mighty kicked about it, and that's what I did. And I continued baking even after I became an editor and got married and all of that. And at some point when blogging, became a thing, I started blogging about food because, like most people of that generation, we wanted to blog for posterity.
Okay.
We just wanted to record things for ourselves, if not our children. Who was thinking about children at the time? But, that was the idea. And I started writing a lot about baking, and I started writing a lot about bread. And around the same time, a friend of mine put up a studio, a kitchen studio. And she said, why don't you come and teach how to bake bread?
Oh, wow.
And I started doing that. And then I realized that most of the books that we get on bread in India or the recipes that we download online are relevant to the US and the UK and to the Western world. In terms of the ingredients, number one, something as basic as the wheat that we get here is a low gluten wheat as compared to the bread friendly wheat that you get in the Western countries. So if you would think about the gluten content or the protein content basically of the wheat that we get in India, the best quality might be 10 or 12, but the ones that you get abroad are 14, and that makes a huge difference to the to the final product. So how do you work around that? And the other thing was weather. If you're making bread in a cold country, it's going to take 45 minutes maybe. The dough is going to take 45 minutes to rise. In a place as hot and humid as Bombay, it's going to take less than half that time. So you need to understand how these ingredients work, how the weather works in conjunction with the ingredients and all of that. So I thought there was, space for a book like that in India. And I just lucked out because I happened to meet Paulomi Chatterjee, who was, the chief editor of Hachette India. And I pitched the idea to her very casually, and she's okay, just get cracking.
Wow.
So that's how the first book happened.
Awesome. So that's the name of that book is Crumbs.
Crumbs, yes.
And where can we find it?
It's on Amazon, Flipkart, all over the place. It's in bookstores.
Great. And coming now to your next book, which is Pangat, A Feast. That was where you read the extract from in the beginning of the episode. So this is a book about Marathi recipes, right?
Yes.
So tell us a little bit how you went from writing about bread to then getting into the specific niche of, Maharashtrian recipes.
And 200 of them.
213 actually.
That would be a lot of
That's
hard
a lot.
work.
That's a lot. So first of all, how long did it take to research these books? Maybe
I've been on this one for 3 years.
Wow,
Okay.
that's a long time. Yeah.
It's been crazy. I've driven the editor up the wall twice over. So,
Yeah.
So I had another question. Is writing your full-time job now? Is this all you
yes, I
concentrate
think you
on?
can say that.
Okay.
Although I do work as a culinary consultant. So I
right.
work with restaurants, I work with, food manufacturers, retailers.
Okay.
But to tell you very frankly, I'm very picky and
Okay.
very choosy about my associations now. I do enjoy writing.
Right.
So that's what I'm trying to focus on for a while now.
Fantastic. So tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about Pangat.
So I think, Pangat has been somewhere at the back of my mind for years and years, in the sense that I'm a Maharashtrian. I
Right.
grew up eating this food. And so the book is dedicated to my maternal grandmother. And she's the one who really got us to be curious about the food that we eat at home.
Right.
So yeah, I've always felt that Marathi cuisine has been terribly misrepresented in the commercial scenario.
Okay.
If you go out and order or look to order Maharashtrian food, you will be given the options of misal pav, vada pav.
Yeah.
Or in fact, the subtitle of this book was once supposed to be Beyond Vada Pav, but obviously
Yeah,
that was a
that would
work
be
in progress.
interesting.
Yeah. So,
But that's absolutely right. Like, that's exactly how it's equated. you know?
yeah, and
Yeah.
if you go to a slightly better place, you might be given the option of veg kolhapuri, and there's no such thing.
Yeah.
So I wanted to break those, just debunk those myths that surround the cuisine.
Right.
Because people seem to think that either Maharashtrian food is laden with coconut, or it's all seafood, or it's all spice.
Right.
And it's not. Because Maharashtra, being the vast state that it is, there is such varied topography that the kind of food that you eat in the Konkan is vastly different from the kind of food that you would eat, say, in Nagpur.
True.
And the fact is that people in the Konkan also, despite being in the same state, may not know what somebody in Nagpur is eating. Of course, there are similarities. Now, if you were to come up with something like bharli wangi is like a ubiquitous, Marathi dish. But there are iterations of this dish, right? There is a bharli wangi that is eaten in the Khandesh, which is a Nashik region,
So
which is
bharli
made in a
wangi
certain
is bengan
stuffed with masalas.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you live on the coastal belt of Maharashtra, you'll probably stuff it with onions and fresh coconut and a
Okay.
certain kind of masala. If you live in Nagpur, where you have absolutely no access to fresh coconuts, you'll use dried coconuts.
Yeah.
So that changes the recipe entirely.
Right.
The name remains the same, but it's an
There are variations
interpretation.
to it,
Yeah. So it's important to, I think, recognize that. To recognize that different regions make the same dish differently, or use and exploit the same ingredients differently, or the fact that even in the same region there are so many communities. So along the Konkan coast there are Pathare Prabhus, there are Kolis, there are Agris, there are Konkani Muslims, there are Jews, and all of these make iterations of the same dish but differently.
Right.
So I thought it was important to somewhere record it.
Right.
The other reason that prompted me to write about this book was there are enough and more cookbooks in Marathi. And they're all about specific cuisines. So it'll be about Saraswat cuisine or Malwan cuisine or about Brahmin cuisine, that kind of thing. But there seems to be no unifying factor. There's no one platform that talks about all of these under one aegis.
Yeah.
So again, that seemed like an opportunity, and I just jumped at it.
Great.
It sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
It sounds
And
like
just,
we'll get
the
a
whole
history
thought.
lesson
Yeah.
along with our recipes.
I hope the history lesson is better than the one I attended in school.
Definitely. We've learned
The
on
one
our
you
podcast.
opted out of, actually.
Yeah, the one I opted out of.
We've learned on a podcast that history is way more interesting than we've been taught in school,
Yeah.
And great. So, Pangat is not yet out for sale, right?
It's on pre-order right now on
Okay.
Amazon, Flipkart, etc.
When will it be out?
End of the month, the 31st of October, but
Okay.
hopefully before that.
Okay, great. And it'll be available in the bookshops as well?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, great. And on that note, we'll take a short break and we'll be right back after this.
Hey everybody, welcome to another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you're not following us on social media, please make sure you do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Also want to remind you, please do fill out our listener survey. This is a really, really important thing for us right now. You can go to ivmpodcast.com/survey. We ask you a few questions about who you are, what kind of podcast you like listening to, what do you think of things going on so far. So please do fill that out. It would help us. Also would like to thank our sponsors on the network this week. We have Intel, Cambly, and Storytel. On Paisa Vaisa, Anupam is joined by Anup Vijaykumar, a SEBI-registered investment advisor. He talks about the Warren Buffett investing strategy and stock markets. On the Scene and the Unseen, Amit is joined by author and columnist Sujata Anandan. She talks about the ups and downs of Maharashtra politics over the last 5 decades. On Advertising is Dead, Varun is joined by business head of Gully Gang Entertainment, Chaitanya Kataria. They discuss the rise of new age music. On Litnama, Lakshmi is in conversation with poet Jasmine Khurana. They discuss the trend of slam poetry. On Geek Fruit, Jishnu is joined by Siddhant Mehta and they do a roundup of the greatest hits and misses of 2019. On Simplified, Chuck and Shrikit simplify the impeachment process in the US and discuss the chances of Trump getting impeached. It's a crossover episode on the Empowering series. As Zarina is joined by Utsav Memoria, host of Postcards from Nowhere. They talk about slow traveling, places to visit in India and abroad, and how to travel on a tight budget. On Postcards from Nowhere, Utsav tells you how to travel safely to offbeat places with controversial histories and politics. And with that, let's get you on with your show.
Welcome back, guys. We still have with us Saee Khandekar. Hey, Saee, that was an amazing first half. I feel like there's so much to learn about our own culture, and It's great. You mentioned there wasn't anything in the Indian context while writing these recipe books, when you wrote the book on bread, Crumbs. So that's what I've kind of been feeling like a lot of things now. I saw even Netflix shows or even merchandise in general. I find that I'm more attracted to Indian stuff, and even we as a publishing house, we found there's a huge gap in the Indian market where there's not enough Indian context given to things happening. And I love that your book is so around Maharashtra, first of all. And
I think what's important, just to digress a bit, but what's important is the vocabulary and the medium in which we talk about, Indian cuisines. Like I was telling you earlier, the problem with regional cuisine is it only gets talked about in the region's language. So there are books on Marathi cuisine, but they're written in Marathi.
Right.
So who's reading them?
Right. Only Maharashtrians or people who understand Marathi.
And Maharashtrians of a certain age group. People belonging to my generation and younger are not comfortable reading Marathi. So how are we reaching out to them? So it's important to challenge the vocabulary and to challenge the medium in which we write about our culinary heritage, so to speak. Which is why I started a Facebook group called Angat Pangat, which means like a playful feast. And the idea was, of course, to learn more about, our own cuisine, but to also talk about it in a language that is universal. And to talk about dishes also in a slightly newer format. So when I do pop-ups and things like that, I try to play around with the recipes, where we're presenting, say, a thalipit as a tostada. And the moment you put it out like that, there is a whole generation and a whole other market of people who are suddenly attracted to it.
Absolutely.
If you look at the dish, it is the same thing that I would eat at home. It is a thalipit with a little thecha on it and maybe some dahi-based salad, raita kind of thing, which I would eat as 3 separate components of one particular meal at home. I'm just, piling them on top of each other and making it look pretty. And there's no liquid nitrogen harmed in the process of this. So it's true to its roots, but it is, because of the vocabulary, accessible to another audience.
Wow, that's a great thought. If you just
it's a nice way to
kind of
mix
repurpose what exists already into the language the gourmet language of today's MasterChef generation, if I may put it like that.
Yeah, exactly. Because
textures and the feels.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a MasterChef baby, so like I've watched everything for the last 10 seasons. So most of my knowledge also has come, or my interest came from watching the show, and then I in fact
you just put a microgreen on top of it and it's done.
Exactly. Get it from the garden, get it fresh. Great. So the next book we're going to talk about is Jerusalem, and it's by Yotam, Ottolenghi and Sami Tamimi. So Yotam has been on MasterChef
many times,
all the seasons, I guess, right? So tell us a little bit about this book, Jerusalem, and what it's about.
This is a book that really resonates with me and with Pangat in the sense that I love how they talk about Jerusalem, and they try to showcase the fact that the cuisine of a region is never a monolith. Mm-hmm. There is no Jerusalem cuisine and just like 5 elements of Jerusalem cuisine. Mm-hmm. There are so many influences. There is the Jewish, there is the Muslim, there is the Christian, and there is so much more. There are things that have come in from a very Mediterranean influence. There is an African influence, and there's so much going on. And because there is so much political unrest, and how that influences the book. So I think influences the cuisine and therefore the book. I think that is something that really struck a chord, and it felt like somebody was talking my kind of language.
Right.
Yeah, because in Maharashtra we've seen something like that, right? Especially in Bombay.
Yeah.
If you were to just pick up the Zunka Bhakar movement, which happened in the 90s, it was completely politically motivated, and it just went put in no time.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, they started by saying, we're going to give Zunka Bhakar at 1 rupee, and it's going to be a full meal and blah, blah, blah. And before you knew it, the Zunka Bhakar Kendras were serving Shezwan noodles and everything, veg biryani and everything else under the sun but Zunka Bhakar.
Yeah.
If you walked in at 2 o'clock, they would say, no, we've run out.
Yeah.
So there are so many things, political, social and otherwise, that have influenced the cuisine of a region. Or like my friend Dr. Dahl, the archaeologist, loves to quote all the time, and I've quoted him in the book. The vada pav can barely be called Maharashtrian or Bombay or Indian even, because who gave us the pav? Who got us the chilies? Who got us the potatoes? So apart from the turmeric and the mustard seeds that go in the tadka, nothing is Maharashtrian. So how do you call that the iconic food of Maharashtra? It is not.
And the same thing is sold without a pav as just vada, aloo vadas or whatever in the north. So, I mean, you can just you can make any version of it.
If you were to think about how this evolves. So, if you spoke to my grandmother's generation, she still does not enjoy a vada pav. At the most, she'll eat a batata vada. She'll never eat a pav because... who eats pav? But, which is terrible because I wrote a book on bread. But the same grandmother is perfectly all right with an aloo ki sabzi featuring on the Naivedya platter. Right? Now, aloo has made forays into our Naivedya platter, into our fasting foods, things like that.
Right.
So a cuisine evolves. So you can't at any point call something inauthentic. It evolves. You just have to accept it. Or the tomato, for instance, again came to us only as recently as the 16th century. But it's something that we cannot think about. We can't think Indian food without tomato. How do you
it's in all the base.
How do you make rajma without tomato? You can't think about it.
Right.
So, and at the same time, the use of tomato has become so rampant, I would say, that we've forgotten some equivalents that we used earlier. So, for instance, if you were to think of tomato as a souring agent, before tomato came, what did we use? To make a curry, especially in Maharashtra, we would use kokum, we would use tamarind, we would use lime or raw mango. So many dried raw mango, fresh raw mango. So many variants. But we've forgotten that whole school of souring ingredients because tomato is quick and it's easy and it's available.
And it gives the color and all to
the dish. And volume and everything.
Exactly.
So I think while we have to accept and acknowledge the way ingredients have evolved and have come to us, and therefore the cuisine has evolved.
Yeah.
We also need to record and document what we've forgotten, because otherwise it's going to become extinct.
That's true. So who would you recommend Jerusalem to?
Actually, anybody who is fond of so many things. If you're fond of cooking, you're fond of eating, you're fond of entertaining, you're fond of travel, you're fond of storytelling,
Right.
you're fond of how you like to read about how the time influences the food, that kind of relationship, then Jerusalem. And it's a beautifully produced book. It's a full color book. It's hardback.
Yeah.
And it's just a pleasure to hold. The quality
Right.
of the paper, the photography, the writing is very evocative. So I would recommend it to anybody.
Like you said, so time is one of the ingredients, and that's what your next book also talks about.
Yes.
That is the missing ingredient,
Yes.
Right.
which is all about time.
Yes.
So, could you tell us something about the book and why it stands out for you?
So the missing ingredient is, it's not as colorful and all of that as Jerusalem, but it is a fascinating book for somebody who likes to study food.
Okay.
And the production of food, the history of food, etc. But it is also very, very important, I would say, for recipe writers and cookbook writers.
Okay.
Because very often what happens is, when you're writing a recipe, it just becomes easy to say, saute the onions for 5 minutes. Now, that's a very, very abstract thing to say. How thickly or thinly you've cut your onions
it
is
depends
going to
on-
determine
yeah,
the time.
yeah.
How
The heat.
fast or slow
Yeah.
your flame is
Right.
going to determine how long it takes. So for a food writer, for a recipe writer, it is important to understand that these things are variable.
Right.
So the idea should be to empower the reader and to make them a better cook. Not to make them dependent.
So
on
if you
the
say
book.
like wait till they are, goldenish brown,
Yeah.
that would be better than saying wait
Exactly.
for... Okay.
So if you look at Pangat, while I've given cooking times in general and,
Right.
all of that, there is one entire section in which I've given gyan to the reader ki you can't, it's not gospel.
Yeah.
You need to use your instinct. And that's
Right.
how most of us learn how to cook.
Yeah.
Right.
The book that is, the grandmother that the book is dedicated to, she used to make me sit in, so this is very interesting. She would make me sit in the balcony of her house.
Okay.
And she would be roasting suji in the kitchen. And she would call from the kitchen and ask me, okay, so what stage is the rava at now?
From the smell.
Yes, from the
Oh,
smell.
yeah.
Is it good enough for upma or is it good enough for shira? Because they demand two different stages of
Shira
brownness.
needs more
Yeah.
roasting of the...
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's how I learned how to cook. So if you were to tell me to translate it exactly into minutes, it's going to be different in, on your stove and different on my stove. So
Yeah.
I might say 15 minutes for a shira.
Right.
But if you do it on high flame and your high flame is not as high as mine, then the cooking time is going to be different.
That's what
Right.
my mom does for gajar ka halwa.
Yeah.
So she's like, when you can smell it throughout
Yeah.
the house, that means you've roasted it enough.
Enough, yeah.
Otherwise, it's not done yet.
So while French cooking and all of that, the science of cooking is absolutely is something to learn from.
Yeah.
I also think it's very important for a cookbook writer to think of empowering the cook, that is reading their book or reading their recipe. And in fact, I was writing this article once about how not to cook from a cookbook. And then I stopped myself and I was like, okay, but you're writing cookbook. So this is not going to work out.
Counterproductive activities.
So that's but I definitely think that it's very important to not be very particular about these things, but to understand that cooking takes time and some processes do take time, and you can't just, shorten the process by putting things in a microwave or putting in fact, just the other day I was looking for a recipe and somebody said, for rajma to get to the correct consistency to make it into tikkis, you have to put it in the pressure cooker for 20 whistles. I was like,
20?
What? Yeah. And I read it again. And she says 20 to 22. So it wasn't a typo.
Wow. Wow.
I was like, this is criminal waste of resources, number one.
Yeah.
No, I don't even think it's 2020.
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
it's
3
made
are
in my
enough.
house all the time, and I think it must be tops 5, 6.
Yeah. So that's the thing. But you depend so greatly on these gadgets, which are designed to make things easier for you and quicker for you, that you're okay with thinking, okay, BCT mein ho jayega.
You will get like Dahl, Rajma Dahl in BCT.
So yeah,
Right.
so that's why I find that book very fascinating, because she talks about
Very,
wine,
very interesting.
she talks about cheese, and how these things really require the time,
Right.
whether it is in minutes or it is in hours. And she talks about chefs from various backgrounds, and how they have experienced. And in one instance, she says, so how do you know whether a steak is done? Do you time it on each side? Or do you check it according to, how it feels according to your hand? There are these areas on your hand that you judge the doneness from. And she talks to this expert, and he says, it just comes from experience. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what it is.
Yeah, true.
So, time is like she says, it's the missing ingredient in every recipe.
Well, it's fantastic you've thought about these things while writing your book. Because,
so all of these have influenced me in some way or the other.
Fantastic. So the last book that we're moving on to is Memories with Food at Gypsy House by Felicity and Roald Dahl.
Yes.
Roald Dahl we've discussed many times on this podcast, but I don't think ever in this context.
I don't think you can run out of discussions.
You can never run out of discussions.
So this book was, they started writing it together, and then he died, and then it was completed by Felicity Dahl. And it's about this holiday home that they had. It's called Gypsy House, and about all the dinners and, the family picnics and all of that they had. And it's like a family cookbook, but I like it because it is so evocative. And it is not at all in any way journalistic or... it doesn't have to be factual. It doesn't have to be all of that. It's a very Roald Dahl book in that sense.
Full of whimsy and
it's
unexpected.
Full of whimsy. It's unapologetic. Absolutely unapologetic.
Awesome.
If you don't like a certain somebody's mother-in-law who came to the dinner, well, you didn't like her, but she made something really beautifully. That kind of thing. And there's lots of little illustrations by Quentin Blake. And beautiful, evocative photographs. And one recipe that really stands out for me from that book is a recipe for rose ice cream. Okay. And it's very unusual in the sense that you cook down the rose petals like you would make gulkand, right? It becomes a brown sort of mush. And magically, after you've added all the other ingredients, they say add a little bit of glycerine, and the brown becomes pink again.
Oh.
Which is just magic. I have never had the guts to try that recipe, because what if it doesn't work? And it's Roald Dahl, and I can't afford to be disappointed.
Yeah, that's true.
But it just sounded so magical to me that you've cooked something, it's become brown as hell, and then you just put a few drops of glycerine, and it becomes this beautiful pink blushing ice cream scoop, and fabulous.
He also loved onions, I believe. That's
yes,
mentioned.
He did.
You would have got along.
You would have got along with that.
So any other recipes that or instances that stand out from the book for you?
Lots and lots, actually, but I think it's the images and the fact that one sees Roald Dahl as this very warm host. And this grandfatherly figure sitting in an armchair and making sure everybody's eating well and that kind of thing. I think that's what really I took away from the book, that the food writing needs to be as evocative as that. A book needs to be as evocative as that.
Right.
And how did you find this book? Because
it was gifted to me.
It was gifted to you.
Yeah, okay. I was in bed. I had an accident.
Okay.
And I was very upset about it because my hand was near paralyzed. Oh. And this very dear friend of mine brought me this book to cheer me up. And it's been with me ever since. It's been years and years, but I love it.
Great. I think this is a book for everyone to read.
Right.
Absolutely.
It's a real quick pick me up or trip into the
you don't even need
unexpected.
To cook from it.
It's just
it's the kind of book that you can take to bed, or you can just read in an armchair while it's raining outside. cup of tea on the side.
Fantastic. So, Saee, if anyone wants to reach out to you directly, where can they find you?
I have a website called...
Sorry, I'd love to do that.
Yeah, so you can find me on my website, saeekhandekar.com. That's SAEEKHANDEKAR.com.
Great. It was lovely having you on the show.
Thank you.
Best of luck for your book.
Thank
we
you.
hope it's a bestseller.
I'm sure it'll be.
I'm sure it'll be. Yeah,
I can see the hard work in front of my eyes.
It looks fantastic, by the way. Listeners, if you'll have any interest, or even if you don't have an interest in cooking, you should pick up this book.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that.
And a big thank you to all our listeners. You can follow the Open Library Project on LinkedIn, Instagram and Facebook for latest updates on our events. And stay tuned for the next Paperback podcast on IVM Podcasts. Happy reading. You can follow IVM Podcasts on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at IVM Podcasts. Listen to Paperback on the IVM Podcast app, website or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Advertising is dead. Yep, you heard me right. Advertising is dead. We're all in the content business now. Let's not call it news, TV, radio, etc., etc. It's all content, and we're in the middle of this weirdly exciting phase where all the borders and lines that have been drawn over decades has been swept away by this lovely thing called the internet. We're a show where we don't dwell on just the stuff that is now, but rather the wider stuff about advertising, media, content, and the whole goddamn circus surrounding it. Tune in every Tuesday for our weekly unboxing of the mystery box we used to call advertising. I'm Varun Dugirala, co-founder and content chief at The Glitch, and this is my new podcast, Advertising is Dead.
How many times have you motivated yourself to improve your sleep, or lose weight, or be more productive? How many times have you failed? Hi, my name is Ashton Doctor. Tune into my show, The Habit Coach Podcast, where we focus on creating small, tiny habits to improve your life instead of those big, impossible tasks. So make listening to me a habit every Monday, Wednesday and Friday on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com or on your favorite podcasting app.